So we're going to be talking about the Afghanistan invasion by the Soviet Union, not the American one. Of course, I might have to come back to that at a later date. I totally made sure the volume was up before I started this, just to be very, very sure. But yeah, once upon a time, there was a video made about the Sour Revolution, which was supposed to be a preamble to the invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviet Union. So this is kind of like a mixture of both. I can go back and cover that. It would be very interesting to talk about that. But for right now, you gotta listen to me talking about the Soviet Afghanistan invasion, because I wanted to do this to the Halo 3 ODST footage. So that's what we're going to be doing. I'm going to be talking about this for you guys, your entertainment. And yeah, so the Soviet-Afghanistan War took place in the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan from December 1979 to February 1989, marking the beginning of a 46-year-long Afghan conflict. It saw the Soviet Union and the Afghan military fight against the rebelling Afghan Mujahideen, aided by Pakistan. While they were backed by various countries and organizations, the majority of the Mujahideen's support came from Pakistan and the United States. As part of Operation Cyclone, the United Kingdom, China, Iran, and the Arab states of the Persian Gulf, in addition to a large influx of foreign fighters known as the Afghan Arabs. Interesting foreshadowing, those guys would later become quote-unquote our enemies. In addition to a large influx of foreign fighters known as the Afghan Arabs, American and British involvement on the side of the Mujahideen escalated the Cold War, ending a short period of relaxed Soviet Union-United States relations. Combat took place throughout the 1980s, mostly in the Afghan countryside, as most of the country's cities remained under Soviet control. The conflict resulted in the deaths of 1 to 3 million Afghans, while millions more fled from the country as refugees. Most externally displaced Afghans sought refuge in Pakistan and in Iran. Between 6.5 and 11.5 of Afghanistan's erstwhile population of 13.5 million people is estimated to have been killed over the course of the Soviet-Afghan War. Yeah, it's crazy. That's a huge number of people. The decades-long confrontation between the Mujahideen and the Soviet and Afghan militaries inflicted grave destruction throughout Afghanistan and has been cited by scholars as a significant factor that contributed to the dissolution of the Soviet Union. As so many things, that's something else I could talk about. It is for this reason that the conflict is sometimes referred to as the Soviet Union's Vietnam, in retrospective analysis. A violent uprising broke out in Herat in March 1979, in which a number of Soviet military advisors were executed. The ruling People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan, having determined that it could not subdue the uprising by itself, requested urgent Soviet military assistance. In 1979, over 20 requests were sent. Soviet Premier Alexei Kosygin, declining to send troops, advised in one call to Afghan Prime Minister Nur Mohammad Taraki to use local industrial workers in the province. This was apparently on the belief that these workers would be supporters of the Afghan government. This was discussed further in the Soviet Union with a wide range of views, mainly split between those who wanted to ensure that Afghanistan remained a socialist state and those who were concerned that the unrest would escalate. Eventually, a compromise was reached to send military aid, but not troops. So this is just very interesting overall. One thing I do want to do a little bit different is I don't just want to read the Wikipedia article. I want to kind of give my thoughts on some of this stuff. When it comes to the Soviet Union's Vietnam, I kind of think that's interesting, and that kind of opens the door for me to talk about the Vietnam War. But it definitely has an interesting slant to it when you think about it that way. So, by mid-1987, the reformist Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev announced the Soviet military would begin a complete withdrawal from Afghanistan. On the 15th of February 1989, the last Soviet military column occupying Afghanistan crossed into the Uzbek Soviet Socialist Republic. With continued external Soviet backing, the PDPA government continued the war alone, and the conflict evolved into the first Afghan civil war. That's another rabbit hole that I'm not going to go down for right now, but yeah, this is interesting. So this starts off, like I said, with the, it starts off on here with the great game between the European powers, which is another interesting rabbit hole, like always. The Sour Revolution, of course, is next, after some other stuff. I mean, we'd be here all day if we talked about the different rabbit holes and stuff. Every time I do a video, that totally doesn't work out. The Marxist People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan. They basically opened the door for the Soviet Union, lowering the drawbridge, in other words. Even before the revolutionaries came to power, Afghanistan was a militarily and politically neutral nation, effectively dependent on the Soviet Union. Yeah, that's strange. Following the Herat uprising, the first major sign of anti-regime resistance, General Secretary Taraki contacted the Soviet Union and asked for practical and technical assistance with men and armament. Kosygin is unfavorable to the proposal on the basis of the negative political repercussions such an action would have for his country, and rejected all further attempts by Taraki to solicit Soviet military aid. In 1979, Taraki attended a conference of the Non-Aligned Movement in Havana, Cuba. On his way back, he stopped in Moscow and met with Brezhnev, Soviet Foreign Minister Andrei Gromyko, and other Soviet officials. So they just tried to get help again. Soviets continued to be reluctant to intervene further in Afghanistan and repeatedly refused Soviet military intervention within Afghan borders during Taraki's rule. Oh, this is funny. Lenin taught us to be merciless toward the enemies of the revolution, and millions of people had to be eliminated in order to secure the victory of the October Revolution. Taraki's reply to the Soviet ambassador Alexander Puzanov, who asked Taraki to spare the lives of the Parchamites sentenced to death. Apparently the Parchamites were the more moderate socialists in Afghanistan. kind of funny. Kind of sad, but kind of funny. So the Taraki government initiated a series of reforms, including a radical modernization of the traditional Islamic civil law, especially marriage law, aimed at uprooting feudalism in Afghan society. The government broke no opposition to the reforms and responded with violence. It says everything I need to know. That's what governments usually do. They usually react violently or over the top. Between April 1978 and the Soviet intervention of December 1979, thousands of prisoners, perhaps as many as 27,000, were executed at the notorious Pula Charkhi prison, including many village mullahs and headmen. Other members of the traditional elite, the religious establishment, and intelligentsia fled the country. Large parts of the country went into open rebellion. The Parcham government claimed that 11,000 were executed during the Amin Taraki period in response to the revolts. The revolt began in October among the Nuristani tribes of the Kunar Valley in the northeast part of the country near the border with Pakistan, and rapidly spread among the other ethnic groups. Pakistani intelligence officials began privately lobbying in the U.S. and its allies to send material assistance to the Islamist rebels. Once again, that's just some very eerie foreshadowing. Pakistani President Mohammad Zia-ul-Haq ties with the U.S. have been strained during the Jimmy Carter presidency due to Pakistan's nuclear program and the execution of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto in April 1979, but Carter told National Security Advisors Zbigniew Brzezinski and Secretary of State Cyrus Vance as early as January 1979 that it was vital to repair our relationships with Pakistan in light of the unrest in Iran. That's another one. The Iranian Revolution. According to former Central Intelligence Agency official Robert Gates, the Carter administration turned to the CIA to counter Soviet and Cuban aggression in the Third World, particularly beginning in mid-1979. CIA sent several covert action options related to Afghanistan to the SCC, Special Coordination Committee of the United States National Security Council. At a 30th of March meeting, U.S. Department of Defense Representative Walter B. Slocum asked if there was any value in keeping the Afghan insurgency going, sucking the Soviets into a Vietnamese quagmire. When asked to clarify this remark, Slocum explained, well, the whole idea was that if the Soviets decided to strike at this tar baby, in other words, Afghanistan, we had every interest in making sure they got stuck. Just kind of interesting, but also kind of boring stuff. This is when the Soviets got involved. In 1979, the Admin government, having secured a treaty in December 1978 that allowed them to call in Soviet forces, repeatedly requested the introduction of troops in Afghanistan in the spring and summer of 1979. They requested Soviet troops to provide security and to assist in the fight against the Mujahideen. After the killing of Soviet technicians in Herat by rioting mobs, the Soviet government sold several Mi-24 helicopters to the Afghan military. On the 14th of April 1979, the Afghanistan government requested the USSR send 15 to 20 helicopters with their crews to Afghanistan. And on the 16th of June, the Soviet government responded and sent a detachment of tanks, BMPs, and crews to guard the government in Kabul and secure the Bagram and Shindand air bases. Yeah, it's interesting stuff that I'm just kind of skipping over, but So the Iranian Revolution that brought about an Islamic theocracy into power led to fears that religious fanaticism would spread through Afghanistan and into Soviet Muslim Central Asian republics. Taraki's murder on a policeman by Amin, who Soviet leadership believed had secret contacts within the American embassy in Kabul, was capable of reaching an agreement with the United States. However, allegations of Amin colluding with the Americans have been widely discredited, and it was revealed in the 1990s that the KGB actually planted the story. This is just, it's very interesting when you think about how all these different, like, intelligence agencies and, their role, like in what you see, what many people have seen in the games, Black Ops, the Black Ops games. Except this is real life. This is what actually happened. This is like, those alphabet agencies really did some crazy stuff. And yeah, this is probably the most rambly thing I've ever done. I'm just getting back into this, so, bear with me, I guess. So, in 31st of October 1979, Soviet informants under orders from the Inner Circle advisors around Soviet General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev relayed information to the Afghan armed forces for them to undergo maintenance cycles for their tanks and other crucial equipment. Meanwhile, telecommunications links to areas outside of Kabul were severed, isolating the capital. In other words, it's about to get serious. The Soviet 40th Army launched its initial incursion into Afghanistan on the 25th of December under the pretext of extending international aid to the puppet Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. On the 25th of December, Soviet Defense Minister Dmitry Ustinov issued an official order stating that the state frontier, the DRA, is to be crossed on the ground, blah blah blah. So yeah, this is just interesting stuff, but I'm just going to keep reading. I'm not going to bore you guys. I just wanted to do a quick, get back into the swing of things video, I guess. More to come, for sure. This isn't the last video I'm ever making. I'm making a whole lot more. Hope you guys enjoy it, and if you're new to the channel, just give me a subscribe, give me a little like, and keep coming back for more if you enjoy it. I'll see you guys in the next one.